This is TK Coleman, and you're listening to Small Business Edge by Ceteris. This is the podcast where we deconstruct small business entrepreneurship through conversations with franchisees, passion-based business owners, and other experts. We learn what it takes to succeed. Today's guest is Chad Walldorf. Chad Walldorf is a native of Chattanooga, Tennessee. He graduated from the University of Virginia with a major in American government. Shortly after college, Chad and two high school friends opened the first Sticky Fingers restaurant in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina in 1992. They eventually sold the company in 2006 after growing it to 16 restaurants throughout the Southeast and a national line of barbecue sauces. Since then, Chad has been involved in a number of other businesses as an investor, advisor, and board member. Chad, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, TK.
Let's talk about Sticky Fingers. For those who have never had the privilege of eating there, don't know the South Carolina area, tell us a little bit what Sticky Fingers is all about, what the brand is all about, and how you got involved in that after college.
Sure. It started with two of my good friends from high school. We had always talked about going into business together someday. Didn't know it would be restaurants and starting in South Carolina, and didn't think it would be as early as we did it. We started less than a year out of college. So one of my friend's dads had a Memphis-style rib place in Memphis, actually, and was moving to Charleston. And so was willing to sort of bring that know-how with him. And there was not a sort of authentic Memphis-style rib joint in the area. And so that's what the brand is all about. And through various other ways, be it the music, which was sort of blues, jazz, and soul, which is the music that you find in the Mississippi Delta. We've tried to be sort of an authentic Memphis-style blues house.
And when you first started this, did you have any experience at all working in or around the restaurant industry?
A tiny bit. I'd worked one summer at Wendy's when I was 16, so I think that qualified me to be to the front of the house manager, the three of us. I'd also worked in room service a little bit in Colorado right before we moved here. So not a lot. I mean, we were young and dumb and naive, and maybe an advantage in a lot of ways because we just kind of worked our tails off and then tried to be like sponges. And everybody that worked with us, we figured we had something to learn from them. You know, we're at whatever restaurants they had worked in before, and we just try to pick their brains about better ways to do things. So we were always trying to learn and every day trying to get better, and had a little bit of a chip on our shoulder because we maybe didn't know much, and that was probably an advantage.
Now, for this first venture, I mean, you didn't buy into an existing franchise. You started from scratch. What was that first step? How did you even know what the first step would be given the limited amount of experience you brought into it?
Sure. So my friend Jeff's dad and mom both were moving to Charleston at the same time. And so they were instrumental in helping us get going because they'd had a similar kind of place. I mean, this had some differences, but they were, I don't know that we could have done it without them and bringing a lot of the know-how that they did. And they actually worked with us in the restaurant the first month or two. So they were a huge help. And then their son, Jeff, had worked in their restaurant for a while. So he was our kitchen manager. And then our partner, Todd, was an accounting major. And so he did the books and paid the bills, et cetera. And then after 6 months of each of us having no clue what the other did and thinking that there'd just be no way to figure it out, and whatever they did was just this mysterious land, 50 feet away from where we were, we all switched jobs and then switched jobs again 6 months later. So it was probably not until we'd been in business a year and a half or close to 2 years before we were all actually properly trained, I guess, for what we were doing and running a restaurant. And that's when we started arguing with each other a little bit and realized we needed to probably get a second location or we were going to kill each other if we didn't do something a little differently.
Now, what was the basis for that argument? Was there anyone who disagreed with the notion that it's time to expand?
I think we were all ready for that. We argued about everything. I mean, it could have been a baked bean recipe or thoughts about different employees or whatever. If you put the three of us in a room together with 100 people, we're probably all very similar, but put the three of us in a room together, we're trying to run a business and we all sort of migrate to our own areas of strength, and those tend to clash with each other's areas of strength. So it was healthy, and it was never rarely was it an unhealthy argument. A few times, probably over the 25 years we've been partners, but it was usually a better decision than any one of us would have made on our own. And it was also helpful having three, so there was always a tiebreaker at the end of the day.
I think that's a really interesting point you tell, Chad, because many people who go into business concern themselves with the question of, how do I find the right people to work with? How do I pick the right business partners? And we sometimes romanticize that relationship. You know, we fancy that a great business partner is someone that you always agree with, you always get along with. And what you're pointing out is that however you guys defined good chemistry, you did not define it in a way that involved always agreeing with each other and seeing things in the same way. Is that correct?
Oh, that's absolutely correct. I mean, I just had lunch with my two partners today, and we continuously sort of joke about how different our opinions tend to be on a lot of different subjects. But I really do think that sort of diversity of thought was certainly a strength. And what's really difficult, important, and we maybe learned to do over the years is sort of subjugate ego. One of everybody's key desires, and especially an entrepreneurial type, is to be right. And it's really difficult and we never really took things to a formal vote, but you'd sort of know that, that the other two were against you and you weren't going to win that one. And it's tough, and it's tough, the ego, but ultimately with the benefit of a little look back wisdom, it really did sort of make us, I think, all better together than we would have been separately. Sounds trite and cliche, but it really was true in our case.
Chad, what's your take on working with friends? Some people caution against it, saying your best friends are not going to be your best business partners. And then some say those are only the people that you want to work with. What's your take?
Right. Yeah. And I've certainly heard both takes over the years. And in this case, it worked out. I don't know that it always would, but it's certainly a lot more fun. That's a lot of history that I think was helpful. And there were maybe times where we sort of would tend to forget that. And then we'd have a buddy come in town and we'd sort of revert back into that old mode. And it was really helpful, I think, in the long run. And I'd tell you, the other thing is I never distrusted their motives. I wasn't worried any of them would steal from me or, try to do anything underhanded. And so that I also think was really important. So in our case, it worked out, not always beautifully, but over the long run, we had a good go at it.
Talk with me more about the restaurant and the expansion. How many locations do you now have?
When we sold the company 10 years ago, we had gotten it up to 16 restaurants.
Okay.
In 5 states around the Southeast. The folks, we sold it to private equity group who took it up to 23 restaurants, and it's now, they ran into all sorts of trouble, and they're down now to a dozen restaurants. And I'm, as of almost a year ago, have come back to run the company for the new owner. It's been through several owners since we sold it.
Is it difficult for you to let go? It's obviously rewarding to sell the company and kind of be able to take a break. But when you're watching someone else build it and expand it, was that tough for you?
I don't think it would have been had they done it the right way. I mean, they grew it fairly quickly over the maybe 2 or 3 years after we sold. And then within 4 years after we sold, they were closing restaurants and laying off employees. And that's something that we had never done. So certainly we had a lot of friends at the company when we sold it, and we were proud of where it worked. And as they became disillusioned with management, that was certainly difficult to see and hear, and sort of watch the culture erode pretty quickly. And we certainly learned culture is leading. It can take a long time, I think, to create a great culture. And in our case, I don't know that it was great, but it was a good culture, and it can go away within a matter of months. And that was certainly very difficult to see.
Tell me more about that. What makes a culture great, and how do you build it?
Trust, I think, and letting people know you're sort of in the trenches with them. I mean, we were, for the first 5 years, we were in the business. We were in restaurants every day, working side by side with folks. And as we got bigger and needed to migrate to this and be in the restaurants less, at least the fact that we had been in their shoes and had, I think, a pretty good understanding of what they were going through. We weren't the kind of guys you were going to call during lunch and demand that they fill out some report that we needed for accounting. And I think that's what happened later, was there were people who had not actually sort of been in the shoes of the operators and didn't understand sort of what life was like for them, and probably took their jobs for granted and sort of got things confused. On our good days, at least, we were always aware that in the corporate office, which we called the sports center, we didn't sell any ribs or wings, and we didn't bring in any income. We were only there to support and take care of the frontline people did. And so if we took care of the operating partners that we had in the restaurants and provided them great customer service, then they were able to provide great customer service to their frontline employees, the folks in the kitchen, washing dishes and waiting on tables and seating tables, mixing drinks, etc., that it worked. And if you sort of flip that and forget who ultimately, where the income's coming from and who kind of at the top of that pyramid, it sort of erodes culture pretty quickly.
It's interesting. One of the common mistakes I see among young entrepreneurs is attempting to cut costs by compromising the investment they make in their culture, in the people who work with them and for them. And time again, you see examples of how making the people that work with you and for you feel supported, feel
Sure.
valued, that is one of the best things you can do for your bottom line.
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't have to be expensive to do it from a monetary standpoint, maybe from a time standpoint. But one of the first things I did when I came back to Sticky Fingers this past year is something that hadn't been done, I think, in the 10 years since we sold the company, is we brought in all the kind of top employees to Charleston. So first we brought all the kitchen managers, I think, together, and had a dozen kitchen managers, and we just sat around in a house in Charleston for a couple of days and just said, hey, what are we doing well, and what are we not doing well, and solicit ideas from them. And we got a lot of great feedback and a lot of great ideas from them. And more importantly than the ideas they gave us were the fact that we them realize we cared about them and gave them a chance to spend some time with people who were in similar positions in other restaurants. And so then we did the same thing with floor managers, with all the catering managers. And then finally we brought in the operating partners and told them, hey, here's what your people have told us as we brought them all in. And secondly, here's sort of how things are going to be changing going forward. It's not a top-down culture, but this is, literally a bottom-up culture. I don't even like the way I worded that, because we sort of flipped what the top and bottom were. So the title I took for myself was Chief Support Officer rather than Chief Executive Officer. And so I was at the sort of bottom of a fulcrum and there to provide support for everybody as we went up sort of this inverted pyramid.
Was this a management philosophy you and your partners had from the beginning?
I don't know that we had it, but we developed it over time. I mean, and that's where I said maybe not knowing much was ultimately a benefit. We didn't, we couldn't act like we were sort of the big CEO types, because we didn't know that much. So we had to learn from everybody that we were working with. And so I think over time, we realized how important that was to culture. Initially, it was just kind of our only option. So we probably got lucky with that, not having a lot of experience when we got going.
Chad, why did you ultimately sell?
We had 1,000 employees in 5 states. My partner, Jeff, probably drove that decision. He was the head of operations. And it was just a lot going on. We were getting married and starting to have kids, and a lot of travel involved and a lot of work. And frankly, I always thought there were people out there who knew the restaurant business better than we did and would know how to grow it and provide more opportunities for our people. And we were, maybe a little bit burned out as well. It had been about 15 years. So it felt like a good time to sort of reinvent ourselves. So that was a lot of the things going through our head as we went through that process.
Well, you certainly achieved a lot in terms of growth during that 15 years. If you got it up to 16 locations, can you tell us a little bit more about how you know when it's time to expand. It's one thing to say, let's open up another location because this is doing well. But once you get past 2 or 3 locations and you start getting into that, double into those double digits, how do you know when is the right time to go in that direction? And what are some tips you can give other young franchise owners about,
Sure.
when to expand?
Yeah, and I don't know that we ever knew for sure. It just sort of happened. We were never ones to sit down and say, all right, here's our sort of hockey stick graph of what growth's going to look like. And I'm usually look at those pretty incredulously when I see somebody who thinks they've got it all figured out what they're going to do. In our case, it was a matter of employees or friends, for the most part, coming to us and saying, hey, we got some connection to some town and think Sticky Fingers would do real well there. Are y'all up for doing it? So that was as much as anything that dictated the growth in the early days. We tried to be careful not to get too far ahead of our skis, but it definitely happened from both a cash flow standpoint and a bandwidth standpoint. I mean, it's hard to both be operating something and growing something simultaneously. And I think our busiest year, we got up to where we had opened 4 restaurants in about a 13-month period, which was tough on the culture and easy to take your eye off the ball, in terms of what you're doing. So we would grow sort of in fits and spurts. So after we did those 4 in a little over a year, we sort of worked to, took some time to digest and get caught up. And so we felt sort of comfortable. But a lot of it was really dictated by the people. And if you had someone you trusted who'd been with you for a while, who was just an all-star doing a great job, and it was a chance to provide them their own restaurant, that felt pretty good and pretty cool. And that's what dictated a lot of it, I think.
Chad, tell me about failure. Talk with me about that. What was an experience for you that was really challenging, that perhaps set you back or made you question yourself, and how you bounce back from that?
Sure. And we had a bunch of them. Opening day of hunting season, we had our second restaurant was in Somerville, and we were convinced, man, all these hunters need a place to eat breakfast. So we opened for breakfast one day, one shift, and for one customer. And so that, we were sort of done with breakfast after that. Lesson learned. Tried a drive-through in Somerville that was also a pretty epic failure. And then, there were a bunch of things, whether it was putting the wrong person in jobs, or we had a big fire at our downtown Charleston restaurant on January. It was the day of the national championship game. So it was probably January 8th or 9th, maybe back in 2001 or 2.
Oh, wow.
Did a couple $100,000 worth of damage. And we hadn't been open in that location for long, and we had Wildlife Weekend in Charleston, sort of the kickoff of the tourist season. It's usually mid-February, and so we had 5 or 6 weeks literally to recover and scrape down every inch of a historic building downtown Charleston, and do a significant amount of repairs. So it was one of those things where it was probably 14, 15-hour days where I would go home and just absolutely reek of smoke from fire. And it's just one of those things you kind of got through, and we got open like a day before Wildlife. But it took just an insane amount of focus and grit, I guess, not only from us, but a ton of employees who could have easily just said, screw it, I'm going to go work somewhere else, or, said, oh, call me when the restaurant's open. But we had teams of people in there every day scrubbing with us. So that's where sort of building the trust and the culture over time, and the fact that we cared about the people that worked there, I think they cared about us and the company as well. And one of those times of need where it really paid off.
When you have moments like that, I imagine that it can be really hard on your employees as well. How do you keep them inspired and motivated during those kinds of times?
I think hopefully the fact that they saw we weren't just telling them to do something, that we were the first ones there and the last ones to leave every day. And we were in there with them, and ideally still going when they needed to take a break. And then, we buy them lunch, but just sort of being there side by side with them, I think.
Chad, for our listeners, many of them may not know that you and I have worked together. I am the education director for the Praxis program, where we pair young people up with apprenticeships and they go get real world experience. And Chad has done work with the Praxis program, providing mentorships to younger people. Chad, in your experience with working with young professionals, what have you learned about making good hiring decisions and taking good hiring decisions from good to great?
Great question. Try to break down some of the silos, I think, and formality of the hiring process, maybe. A question that used to be on our application that fell off in the 10 years after we sold the company, but we added back just recently was, hey, tell us something about yourself that is maybe a little embarrassing or would make us laugh. And just try to not make it so formal, and anything I think you can try to do to get some visibility into what people are really like without just sort of giving rote answers is helpful in sort of helping people get from that good to great. I mean, we try to hire attitudes. We're not as worried about sort of the technical knowledge of a position as much as a eagerness to learn. And when I was talking earlier about how much ego I think can get in the way, and the willing and the desire to be right, somebody who's willing to sort of admit mistakes and move forward, and I think sort of living that yourself and being able to admit people that are working for you, hey, I screwed up and you're right and I'm wrong, goes a long way, I think.
Chad, my final question to you is, what is one thing that most young franchisees or entrepreneurs need to know but don't know?
I mean, this will probably sound trite as well, but the amount of work that it takes to be successful, I think, is just insanely enormous. And it's a lot of times that extra effort that really, really makes all the difference. It may be a sales call and you make 100 calls and they don't lead to anything. And it's that 101st call that leads to sort of great things. And I found that over and over and over again. I mean, we when we were selling the company, we interviewed 5 different investment bankers, and we were sort of ready to go. But there was this one name that kept popping up, a guy who was in San Francisco, and we just had trouble connecting. And we reached out to him that one last time and sort of made the effort to get together. And he's the guy who did sort of a remarkable job in selling the company that I'm confident none of the other 5 people would have. And it would have been really, really easy not to have sort of made extra on that 6th phone call, because you're sort of burnt out on the process and think you've learned it all. And so that's just one example, and there are hundreds of examples of where it's that midnight email that you send where you're ready to go to bed and call it a day, and you're like, all right, I'm going to knock this one other thing off my list. And more often than not, in my experience, it's that last one that ends up paying dividends, maybe in ways you don't see coming.
Chad, I appreciate you stopping by and joining us today and sharing some of your insights and experience. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thanks, TK. I enjoyed it. Appreciate what y'all do.
Take care. For added insights and a full collection of episodes from Small Business Edge, visit ceteris.com/podcast.